I had spent years searching for the perfect property, something away from the noise, the traffic, the constant crush of humanity. A place where I could wake up to birdsong instead of car horns, where my morning coffee could be enjoyed with a view of nature instead of concrete. When my realtor called about a modest house with private lake access in the Lakeview community, I immediately scheduled a viewing. The house itself was nothing extraordinary. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that needed updating. But what sold me was the backyard. It sloped gently down toward Pine Lake, ending at a wooden fence with a gate that opened directly onto a narrow walking path along the water. The realtor explained that my property line extended all the way to the lake edge, including the path and gate. Other residents could access the lake from the community dock about a quarter-mile away, but this section was exclusively mine. I signed the papers the next day. The peace I felt that first morning, sitting on my patio watching the mist rise off the water, was everything I had dreamed of. My golden retriever, Max, loved exploring the shoreline on our private walks. For the first week, everything was perfect. Then I met Carol. She appeared at my front door on a Saturday afternoon, clipboard in hand, plastic smile affixed to her face. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and she wore the unofficial uniform of HOA presidents everywhere, pressed khakis, and a polo shirt with the community logo embroidered on the breast pocket. "Welcome to Lakeview Estates," she said, extending a hand that I reluctantly shook. "I am Carol Henderson, president of the Homeowners Association. We are so pleased to have a new resident join our little family." I nodded politely. "Thank you. I am loving the peace and quiet so far." Carol's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, we work very hard to maintain the quality of life here. That is why we have such strict community guidelines." She thrust a thick binder toward me. "This contains all our bylaws and regulations. I suggest you familiarize yourself with them immediately to avoid any issues." I accepted the binder, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. Carol's eyes drifted past me toward my backyard. "I notice you have direct lake access," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "That must be convenient." "It is one of the main reasons I bought the property," I replied. Carol nodded slowly. "You know, it is rather inconvenient for the rest of us who have to walk all the way around to the community dock, especially for those of us on the board who frequently need to inspect the entire shoreline." I said nothing, unsure how to respond to what seemed like a complaint about my property feature. "Perhaps we could discuss that at some point," Carol continued. "Many of our residents believe in sharing amenities for the greater good of the community." Before I could formulate a response, she pivoted. "Be sure to submit any exterior modification requests in writing at least 30 days in advance. We meet on the first Monday of each month to review them." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me holding the heavy binder and a growing sense of unease. 3 days later, I was tending to my garden when I noticed 2 people walking along the community side of my fence, periodically stopping to peer through the slats. I recognized one as Carol. The other was an older man in golf attire who I would later learn was Herbert, the HOA treasurer. They pretended not to notice me watching them as they studied my gate with particular interest. Carol pointed several times, gesturing in a way that suggested she was explaining something to Herbert. I continued my gardening, but kept an eye on them until they eventually moved on. The following day, my doorbell rang just as I was preparing dinner. Standing on my porch were Carol, Herbert, and a stern-looking woman introduced as Patricia, the HOA secretary. "We were hopping to discuss something with you," Carol said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping into my foyer. The others followed. "We have been reviewing the community amenities," Carol began, "and we believe your gate could be of tremendous benefit to all residents, especially those of us who live on this side of the development." I frowned. I am not sure I understand. Herbert cleared his throat. "What Carol is saying is that if you provided us with a key to your gate, residents would not have to walk the extra quarter-mile to access the lakefront path." I felt a surge of disbelief. "That gate is on my private property. It is not a community access point." Patricia spoke up, her voice clipped and professional. "We understand that, but in the spirit of community cooperation, we thought you might consider sharing access. It would be a wonderful gesture from a new resident." I shook my head firmly. "I specifically purchased this property for the private access. The gate and path are part of my lot. I am sorry, but I am not comfortable having people walking through my backyard." Carol's pleasant demeanor faltered for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "I see. Well, perhaps you will reconsider once you have had more time to become part of our community family. We find that those who contribute most tend to have the smoothest experience here at Lakeview." The implied threat was not subtle. After they left, I stood in my living room, staring out at my beautiful, peaceful backyard, and the gate that apparently had become the focus of the HOA's attention. I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. The first letter appeared in my mailbox a week later. Printed on official HOA letterhead, it formally requested that I consider providing controlled access to my lakefront gate for the benefit of the wider community. The letter cited community spirit and shared responsibility, but mentioned no specific bylaws or requirements. I filed it away without responding. 3 days later, a second letter arrived, this one citing Section 8.3 of the HOA bylaws regarding common area enhancements. I pulled out the massive binder Carol had given me and located Section 8.3. It referred exclusively to community-owned property and had nothing to do with privately owned access points. They were trying to intimidate me with official-sounding but irrelevant regulations. The letters continued to arrive every few days, each more strongly worded than the last. Then one morning, I found a note taped to my front door. Unlike the official letters, this one was printed on plain paper. "Your continued refusal to share lake access is being noted by the board and other residents. The path behind your property is considered a common access way by long-standing community tradition. Please reconsider your position before formal action becomes necessary." It was unsigned, but I had no doubt where it had come from. That afternoon, I took photos of my property line markers and the gate, then drove to the county record's office. After an hour of research, I had copies of my deed, the development plat map, and the original community plans. All confirmed what I already knew: my property line extended to the lake's edge, and the gate and path were completely within my boundaries. Armed with this documentation, I drafted a formal response to the HOA board. In clear, firm language, I stated that the gate was on my private property, cited the relevant documents, and respectfully declined their request for access. I hand-delivered copies to each board member's home and kept copies for my records. The next morning, my doorbell rang aggressively at 7:15 a.m. Carol stood on my porch with Herbert and Patricia flanking her like lieutenants. "We received your letter," Carol said, not bothering with pleasantries, "and we find your position unfortunate." I remained calm. My position is based on my property rights, which are clearly documented. Herbert stepped forward, waving a paper. "According to Bylaw Article 12, residents must comply with board requests regarding community enhancement projects. That bylaw refers to community property, I countered. My gate is on private property, as confirmed by the county records I researched yesterday. Patricia spoke next, her voice colder than before. The board can vote to impose fines for noncompliance with community standards and directives. Only for actual violations, I replied, not for refusing requests that have no basis in the bylaws or my deed restrictions. Carol's face had turned an interesting shade of pink. Perhaps you do not understand how things work here at Lakeview. The board determines what constitutes the best interests of the community. Your uncooperative attitude will not serve you well. I stood my ground. I understand perfectly how property rights work. The gate stays locked and no keys will be distributed. This is not negotiable. After they left, I immediately scanned all the documents I had gathered and emailed them to myself as backup. Something in Carol's eyes told me this battle was far from over. That evening, I found yet another notice in my mailbox. This one was an official warning of potential fines for failure to comply with board directives regarding community access features. It stated that if I did not provide a key to my gate within 7 days, I would face an initial fine of $100, with additional daily fines of $25 thereafter. I placed this notice with the others in a growing file labeled HOA Harassment. The line had been drawn, and I was not going to back down. What I did not yet realize was how quickly things would escalate, or how personal this fight would become. The retaliation started subtly. A violation notice for grass that was allegedly half an inch too tall, though I had mowed just 2 days earlier. A warning about my non-compliant mailbox, despite it being identical to others on the street. Each notice threatened fines if not corrected within 48 hours. I addressed each violation immediately, taking dated photos as evidence. But as soon as one issue was resolved, another would appear. My garbage cans were improperly stored, though they were in exactly the same location as my neighbors. The trim on my house suddenly required repainting, despite being freshly painted when I moved in. Then one morning, I stepped outside to find my trash cans overturned, garbage strewn across my driveway. It could have been animals, I told myself, though the cans had been securely closed. 3 days later, it happened again. This time, I noticed that only my cans had been disturbed. None of my neighbors were affected. Meanwhile, Carol had taken the conflict public. A printed notice appeared on the community bulletin board near the clubhouse. Attention LAKEVIEW, RESID and TS. The board regrets to inform you that lakefront access improvement plans have been delayed due to one resident's refusal to cooperate with community enhancement efforts. The board is exploring all options to ensure fair access for all members. Though I was not named specifically, everyone knew which property had private lake access. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now gave me cold looks or avoided me altogether. I found myself becoming anxious about leaving my house, worried about what might await me when I returned. Then one evening, while playing with Max in the backyard, I noticed something disturbing: footprints in the soft earth near my gate. Someone had been on my property, examining the lock. When I looked closer, I could see scratches around the keyhole, as if someone had tried to force it. I immediately checked that the lock was still secure, then went inside and ordered security cameras online. Before the cameras arrived, however, events took an even more troubling turn. I returned home from work to find a notice of a special HOA meeting scheduled for the following evening. The agenda listed only one item: discussion of lakefront easement rights and access requirements. I knew I needed to attend, but I also sensed it would be an ambush. I prepared by reviewing all my documentation again and installing a voice recording app on my phone. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. When I walked in, the room fell silent. Nearly 30 residents were already seated, with the board members at a table facing the audience. I took an empty chair near the back, acutely aware of the hostile glances directed my way. Carol called the meeting to order, then launched into a speech about community unity and shared resources. Without using my name, she described a situation where one resident was selfishly blocking traditional access to a historically shared pathway. Herbert followed with a convoluted explanation of easement rights that sounded authoritative, but contained numerous legal inaccuracies. Then Patricia invited community input. One by one, residents stood to express their disappointment in the new neighbor who refuses to be a team player. Some shared stories of how they always used to cut through that yard in the past, though the previous owner had lived there for 15 years and kept the gate locked, according to my realtor. Finally, Carol turned to me. Would you like to explain to your neighbors why you feel entitled to exclusive use of access that has traditionally been shared? All eyes in the room turned to me. Quietly, I turned on my phone's recording app and placed it on my lap. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, I began calmly. I purchased my property with the understanding that it included private lake access. County records and my deed confirm that the gate and path are entirely within my property lines. While I appreciate the desire for convenient lake access, I am not comfortable having strangers walking through my backyard at all hours. An older resident interrupted. It has never been a problem before. We have always used that path. I turned to him respectfully. According to the previous owner whom I spoke with before purchasing, the gate has always been private and locked. If anyone was using it, they were doing so without permission. Carol cut in sharply. That is simply not true. I have personally walked that path many times over the years. So you are saying you entered the previous owner's private property without permission? I asked. Carol flushed. That path has always been considered community access. Not according to the county records, I replied, and not according to the previous owner. Well, I walked behind your fence just last week to inspect the situation myself, Carol declared, and there are no clear property markers indicating private ownership. The room fell silent as Carol realized what she had just admitted. I said nothing, but made sure my phone was still recording. The meeting deteriorated from there, with Carol hastily moving to adjourn after her slip-up. As people filed out, I remained seated, waiting until most had left before retrieving my phone and stopping the recording. I now had Carol on record admitting to trespassing on my property, information that would prove invaluable in the days to come. The morning after the HOA meeting, I called several attorneys before finding one who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. Lawrence Green had silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I explained my situation, played the recording of Carol's admission, and showed him my growing file of harassment documentation. This is unfortunately common, Lawrence said after reviewing everything. HOAs often overstep their authority, counting on residents being too intimidated to fight back. He looked up from the documents, but they have picked the wrong person to bully this time. Lawrence confirmed what I already knew. The gate and path were unquestionably on my private property, and no easement existed that would grant the HOA or residents access rights. Furthermore, the pattern of targeted violations and public shamming could constitute harassment. What they are doing is illegal on several fronts, Lawrence explained. The trespassing is clear-cut. The selective enforcement of HOA rules as retaliation is also actionable, and attempting to force you to provide access to your private property exceeds their authority under the bylaws. Lawrence advised me to continue documenting everything, but to take additional protective measures. You need video evidence, he said, and you need to make it clear that you know your rights and are prepared to defend them. That afternoon, I installed security cameras covering my backyard, gate, and the perimeter of my property. I positioned them carefully to ensure they captured anyone approaching the gate or walking along my fence line. I also posted small but visible, private property, no trespassing signs at the corners of my lot. For the next week, I went about my routine as normally as possible, despite the continuing cold shoulders from neighbors and the occasional new violation notice. The cameras, meanwhile, were capturing exactly what I needed. The first incident occurred just 2 days after installation. Carol and Patricia walked along the outside of my fence, stopping at the gate. The camera clearly showed Carol reaching through the fence slats, attempting to manipulate the lock. After several minutes of failed attempts, they left, having no idea their actions were being recorded. 3 days later, Herbert appeared with another man I recognized from the HOA meeting. They spent nearly 15 minutes examining the gate and taking photographs. At one point, Herbert tried to climb partway up the fence to look over into my yard, an action clearly captured by my cameras. Most damning of all was footage from the following Sunday morning. While I was attending church, my cameras recorded Carol actually entering my backyard through a side gate I had forgotten to lock. She walked directly to the lake gate, produced what appeared to be a set of tools, and attempted to remove the lock entirely. When that failed, she spent several minutes taking pictures of my backyard before leaving the way she had come. Each evening, I downloaded the footage, labeled it with dates and times, and added it to my evidence file. I also kept a detailed journal of every interaction, notice, and incident, no matter how small. Lawrence had explained that establishing a pattern would be crucial to our case. By the end of the week, I had documented 5 separate instances of board members trespassing or attempting to tamper with my property. I had clear evidence of Carol's illegal entry into my backyard. I had the recorded admission from the HOA meeting, and I had the complete paper trail of escalating violation notices that coincided perfectly with my refusal to provide gate access. On Friday, I met with Lawrence again to review all the new evidence. His expression grew increasingly grave as he watched the videos. "This goes beyond HOA overreach," he said finally. "This is criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and targeted harassment. We have more than enough to take legal action now." Lawrence outlined our strategy. First, he would send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, documenting the harassment and trespassing with selected evidence attached. Simultaneously, we would file a police report regarding the criminal aspects of their behavior, particularly Carol's unauthorized entry into my backyard. "Are you prepared for the backlash?" Lawrence asked. "Once we take these steps, there is no going back." I thought about the peace I had sought when moving here, the sanctuary that had been violated, and the principle at stake. "I did not start this fight," I said firmly, "but I am certainly prepared to finish it." The cease and desist letter was delivered to each board member's home by certified mail on Monday morning. It detailed every incident of harassment, trespassing, and attempted property tampering, with references to specific dates, times, and attached photographic evidence. It demanded an immediate end to all such activities, a written retraction of the public notice regarding lake access, and the withdrawal of all violation notices issued against me since the gate access dispute began. The letter concluded with a clear warning that failure to comply would result in legal action for harassment, defamation, and conspiracy to violate property rights. It was signed by Lawrence Green, with his impressive legal credentials prominently displayed in the letterhead. That same afternoon, I visited the local police station to file a report. I brought printed copies of the most serious video evidence, including Carol entering my backyard and attempting to remove my gate lock. The officer who took my report, a serious-looking woman named Rodriguez, reviewed the materials with professional interest. "This is pretty clear-cut trespassing," Officer Rodriguez commented as she watched the footage. "And this attempted tampering could potentially be charged as attempted breaking and entering or vandalism, depending on the prosecutor's discretion." She took detailed notes and made copies of all my evidence for the police file. "We will need to interview Ms. Henderson about these incidents," she explained. "Given the ongoing nature of the situation, we will treat this as a priority." I left the police station feeling a strange mix of vindication and apprehension. The wheels of justice were turning, but I knew the situation at home might get worse before it got better. I did not have to wait long for the first reaction. That evening, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. It was Herbert, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What do you think you are doing?" he demanded without preamble. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? Carol's husband plays golf with Judge Simmons. You cannot possibly win this." "I am simply protecting my property rights," I replied calmly. "Everything in that letter is factual and documented. I suggest you consult with a real attorney about your legal exposure here." Herbert sputtered something about working things out as neighbors before hanging up. I immediately called Lawrence to report the conversation, which he advised me to document in my incident journal. The next morning, I received an email from Patricia, suddenly adopting a conciliatory tone. "We seem to have had a misunderstanding regarding the nature of the lakefront access. Perhaps we could meet informally to discuss a compromise solution that would benefit everyone." I forwarded the email to Lawrence, who advised me not to respond or meet with any board members without him present. "They are in damage control mode," he explained. "But do not be fooled. They are trying to find a way out that saves face." 2 days passed in tense silence. I continued my normal routine, though I remained vigilant and kept my cameras well maintained. Then, on Thursday afternoon, as I was returning from walking Max, I saw a police cruiser parked in front of Carol's house. Officer Rodriguez and another officer were standing at her door, speaking with her. From a distance, I could see Carol's face had gone pale as she looked at something the officers were showing her. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By evening, my next-door neighbor, who had previously been avoiding me, stopped by to check if everything was okay. "I heard Carol had the police at her house," she said, curiosity clearly driving her sudden concern. "Something about trespassing." I simply nodded. "It is an ongoing legal matter. I cannot really discuss it." The neighbor's eyes widened. "So it is true. Some people are saying she might be arrested." I neither confirmed nor denied it, but the rumor mill was clearly operating at full capacity. By nightfall, I had received 3 more neighborly check-ins from residents suddenly interested in my well-being. The following day, I found an official HOA letter in my mailbox. Unlike the previous hostile notices, this one was almost apologetic in tone. The Lakeview HOA Board wishes to express its desire to reach an amicable resolution to recent misunderstandings regarding property access and community standards. We propose a meeting with all parties and their legal representatives to discuss a mutually beneficial path forward. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to arrange such a meeting. It was signed by Patricia, not Carol, a telling detail. I called Lawrence immediately. "They are running scared," he said after I read him the letter. "The police visit made this real for them. Now they are trying to avoid legal consequences." Lawrence advised that we should agree to a meeting, but only after receiving certain assurances in writing. He drafted a response that accepted the meeting proposal contingent upon a written acknowledgement that my gate and path were private property, a formal withdrawal of all violation notices since our dispute began, and a commitment that Carol would recuse herself from the meeting and any future HOA decisions regarding my property. The response was met with surprising speed. Within hours, Patricia sent an email agreeing to all conditions and suggesting a meeting the following week. The tide had turned dramatically, and I was finally in a position of power rather than defense. The morning after the police visit to Carol's home, I received unofficial word that she had been temporarily relieved of her duties as HOA president pending an internal investigation. Patricia was now serving as interim president, with Herbert conspicuously absent from recent communications. The violation notices stopped immediately. A landscaping crew mysteriously appeared to edge my lawn, though I had not requested this service. My mailbox, previously deemed non-compliant, received no further mention. It was as if a switch had been flipped, transforming me overnight from community pariah to someone to be carefully appeased. Some neighbors began to reach out cautiously. Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man who lived 3 doors down, stopped me while I was walking Max. "I want to apologize," he said quietly. "I was at that meeting, and I believed what Carol told us about the lake access. I should have known better than to take sides without hearing all the facts." I assured him no apology was necessary, but I appreciated his candor. Over the next few days, several other residents made similar overtures, each expressing some version of having been misled about the situation. The scheduled meeting with the HOA board took place the following Tuesday in a conference room at Lawrence's office, neutral territory that also signaled we were approaching this as a legal matter, not a neighborhood dispute. Patricia and 2 other board members attended, accompanied by a nervous-looking man introduced as the HOA's attorney. Lawrence opened the meeting by laying out the facts of the case in clear, unequivocal terms. He presented a timeline of events, supported by documentation and video evidence. The HOA attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as the presentation continued, occasionally whispering urgently to Patricia. When Lawrence finished, Patricia cleared her throat. "On behalf of the board, I want to express our sincere regret for this situation. It appears there have been serious misunderstandings and inappropriate actions taken." The HOA attorney interjected. "My clients are prepared to acknowledge that the gate and path in question are indeed private property, with no established easement or community access rights." Lawrence nodded, "And the harassment campaign against my client." Patricia had the grace to look ashamed. "The board acknowledges that certain actions were taken that may have appeared retaliatory. We are prepared to rescind all violation notices issued since the dispute began, and to provide written assurance that no similar actions will occur in the future." The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out the details of a formal agreement. By the end, The HOA had committed to issuing a public retraction of their claims about lake access, implementing new procedures for reviewing property boundaries before making access claims, and providing me with a modest reimbursement for legal expenses. Most significantly, they agreed to my demand for a special community meeting where the full facts would be presented to all residents. That meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. The clubhouse was packed, with nearly every household represented. Patricia opened with a formal apology for the miscommunication and unfortunate events surrounding the lake access dispute. She then introduced me. I had prepared carefully for this moment, wanting to be firm but not vindictive. I walked to the front of the room, laptop in hand, and connected it to the projector. I would like to share with you the actual timeline of events, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I moved here seeking peace and privacy, values I believe we all cherish. Slide by slide, I presented the documented evidence. The initial requests for my gate key, the escalating demands, the barrage of violation notices that coincided precisely with my refusal, and the public bulletin board notice that had turned neighbors against me. I did not show the videos of Carol trespassing or tampering with my gate, feeling that would be unnecessarily humiliating to her in her absence. Instead, I simply stated that unauthorized entry to my property occurred multiple times, as documented in police reports. The room remained silent as I concluded. I have always been willing to be a good neighbor. What I cannot accept is having my legal property rights violated or being subjected to harassment for defending those rights. I hope we can move forward now with mutual respect for both community needs and individual property boundaries. The response was unexpected. Several residents applauded. Others nodded in evident support. A few looked embarrassed or uncomfortable, but no one spoke in defense of the previous board's actions. Patricia then presented the formal resolution the board had drafted, acknowledging my property rights and apologizing for the dispute. She also announced a proposed amendment to the HOA bylaws that would explicitly prohibit the board from attempting to claim or control access to privately owned features such as gates, paths, or other boundary structures without clear legal easements. When put to a vote, the amendment passed unanimously. It was a complete vindication, not just a personal victory for me, but a structural change that would protect all residents from similar overreach in the future. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached to introduce themselves properly or to express their support. For the first time since moving to Lakeview, I felt I might actually belong here after all. The legal aftermath unfolded over the next several weeks. Carol was formally charged with criminal trespassing and attempted tampering with private property. Given her lack of prior offenses, she was offered a plea deal, community service and probation in exchange for an admission of guilt. Her husband's golf connection with Judge Simmons proved irrelevant. The judge recused himself from the case due to the potential conflict of interest. The HOA was required to issue a formal written apology that was mailed to every resident. They also provided me with a settlement covering all my legal fees, plus additional compensation for the emotional distress and harassment I had endured. While not a fortune, it was enough to fund a complete renovation of my lakefront garden and gate area. I invested in a new, reinforced gate with an advanced electronic lock that recorded each entry and exit. Above it, I installed a discreet but visible sign: "Private property, no trespassing, video surveillance in operation." The message was clear but not antagonistic. Herbert resigned from the board shortly after our settlement was finalized. Patricia remained as interim president until the next scheduled election, during which a completely new board was installed, one committed to transparency and respect for property rights. Carol and her husband put their house on the market 3 months after the police visit. I saw them moving out one Saturday, loading boxes into a moving truck. Carol glanced in my direction but quickly looked away when our eyes met. I felt no animosity toward her, only relief that the conflict was truly over. Gradually, life at Lakeview settled into the peaceful routine I had originally sought. Morning coffee on my patio became a pleasure again rather than an anxiety-filled vigil. Max and I resumed our walks along our private lakefront path, enjoying the serenity we had fought so hard to preserve. What surprised me most was how the community dynamic shifted. Rather than being ostracized as the difficult resident, I found myself respected for standing up to bullying and overreach. Several neighbors confided that they too had experienced intimidation from the previous board, but had been afraid to challenge it. My story began to circulate beyond our community. A local newspaper ran a feature on HOA disputes, using my case as an example of residents successfully defending their rights. An online community dedicated to HOA issues invited me to share my experience, which I did anonymously but in detail. The advice I offered to others facing similar situations was simple: document everything, know your legal rights, and do not be intimidated by those who count on your compliance through fear or social pressure. 1 year after the dispute began, I hosted a small gathering on my patio to mark the anniversary, not of the conflict, but of its resolution. Among the guests were Lawrence, Officer Rodriguez, and several neighbors who had become genuine friends. As we enjoyed the sunset over the lake, Lawrence raised his glass in a toast. "To standing your ground," he said, "and to the peace that comes from knowing your rights and defending them." Looking out over the tranquil water, I reflected on how close I had come to giving in. How tempting it had been, in those early days, to surrender my key just to avoid conflict. How easily I might have accepted the lie that my property was somehow less mine because others wanted access to it. Instead, I had held firm. I had fought smart rather than angry, and in doing so, I had not only protected my own sanctuary but had helped create a more just community for everyone. Beyond my newly reinforced gate, the lake rippled gently in the evening breeze. It was everything I had dreamed of when I first moved here: peace, beauty, and now, true security in the knowledge that what was mine remained mine, respected and protected by both law and community.